4 penalties, 3 race weekends. Let's go through every one of them in order, with what the stewards actually said, and then look at something that happened in the same race as one of them to another Ferrari driver, under the exact same regulation. Start at Monaco. Hamilton gets a 5-second time penalty for exceeding the pit lane speed limit, which was set at 60 kilometers per hour for that event. The margin, 0.1 kilometers per hour over. 1/10. He wasn't the only one caught by it. Multiple drivers were penalized for the same infraction that weekend, and Pierre Gasly's team, Alpine, successfully appealed his sanction, and he avoided serving it. Hamilton stood, moved to Silverstone, the British Grand Prix. This is the false start. Hamilton is handed a 5-second penalty for creeping forward before the lights went out. Ferrari's team principal, Fred Vasseur, addressed it directly when a reporter suggested it fit a pattern of mistakes. Mistakes? You are a bit harsh, he said. The car is moving on the grid for 2 millimeters. It's a possibility, but it's a bit harsh to say it's a mistake. On the sensor data specifically, from the sensors we don't see the car moving on the grid. The stewards' side, they determined Hamilton moved on the third of 5 red lights, based on onboard footage, and applied the penalty regardless of what the car's own sensors showed. Hamilton said afterward that the stewards agreed he hadn't left his grid box, and that the FIA was reviewing how pre-start movement gets judged going forward. Now Spa, the Belgian Grand Prix, and this is where it gets specific enough to actually compare. First lap, Hamilton and George Russell go side by side into Les Combes. Russell has an overlap, contact happens, his car snaps into the gravel, and his race is over. The steward's written ruling said Russell had established, quote, sufficient overlap, and was entitled to racing room. Their standard penalty for that call is 10 seconds. They cut it to 5, citing mitigating circumstances in Hamilton's driving. Russell himself, climbing out of the gravel, told reporters it was more of a racing incident and that he didn't think Hamilton deserved a penalty at all. Sky's Martin Brundle said on air that the penalty possibly cost Hamilton a podium, calling that part speculative. 8 laps later, same corner. Charles Leclerc, Hamilton's teammate, is defending against Oscar Piastri on the exact same piece of track. Piastri pulls alongside on the outside, Leclerc moves across to set up his line into the corner, contact happens, and Piastri's floor gets torn up. The stewards review it and hand out no penalty at all. Their reasoning on the record, Piastri's front axle hadn't drawn level with Leclerc's front axle at the point of contact. So under the FIA's wheel-to-wheel alignment standard, he hadn't built up enough of an overlap to have established a right to the corner. No overlap threshold met, no penalty regardless of the damage. Piastri said afterward he expected at least some sanction. Mercedes reportedly warned their own driver, Kimi Antonelli, to watch out for Leclerc doing the same thing later in the race because of what had just happened to Piastri. So here's the actual comparison, stated plainly. 2 collisions, same corner, same race weekend, both reviewed under the same regulation. One driver had, in the steward's own language, sufficient overlap and the contact cost him the race. The other driver didn't quite have enough overlap by the steward's technical measurement, and the contact cost him nothing. That's not 2 identical incidents getting different rulings for no reason. The steward's documents show a specific technical threshold, front axle alignment, that separated the 2 calls. Whether that threshold is the right one to hang an entire penalty decision on is a separate question. And its one drivers were reportedly scheduled to race directly with the FIA the following weekend, specifically because of how different the 2 outcomes looked from the outside. Separately, that same Spa weekend, Ferrari was fined after Hamilton's pit release knocked down a mechanic. The stewards ruled Hamilton wasn't personally at fault and that it didn't justify a sporting penalty, only a fine against the team, part of it suspended. Then Hungary. 2 penalties in 1 weekend. Saturday, qualifying. A 3-place grid drop for unnecessarily impeding Oscar Piastri in Q3. Hamilton said he was told too late that Piastri was closing in behind him, and Ferrari has since accepted some of that miscommunication was on their side. Sunday, mid-race. Ferrari pits him under the virtual safety car, and he's clocked at 80.1 kilometers per hour in an 80 kilometer per hour pit lane. 5 seconds for 1/10 of a kilometer per hour over. The regulation cited was Article B1.6.3883 of the FIA Formula 1 sporting regulations. Vasseur to Canal Plus afterward, "This isn't a good result at all. We can't be satisfied with this. We made too many mistakes today, beginning with the 2 starts. Then we lost a position on the track to Verstappen and we made mistakes during the pit stops. The pit limiter was released too early. In the end, it's not good. Here's what Hamilton said about the run overall in his own words. After the Hungary grid drop was announced on Instagram, sometimes you just can't catch a break. Another weekend when I've been feeling great throughout all the sessions, but then it just falls apart. And after 3 penalties in 3 weekends, it's becoming difficult to hang on to that positivity. On team radio, told about the pit lane penalty, handing out penalties like crazy, crossing the line, every opportunity I give those stewards, every single time they give me a penalty. What he didn't say is as important as what he did. Asked directly, he took what he called ultimate responsibility for the sequence and described his own performance across 2 of the weekends as pretty bad from my side. What he raised, specifically, was consistency. Comparable incidents landing different outcomes. That's a narrower claim than bias, and it's one he made on the record to reporters, not one built for a title. He's also not the only person in the paddock who's raised that complaint this year, or in past seasons. McLaren's Andrea Stella pushed the FIA to enforce clearer standards on defending cars leaving racing room in the same stretch of races. George Russell has separately called for full-time salaried stewards, rather than a rotating volunteer panel, arguing it would bring more consistency to judgment calls. It's a long-running debate in the sport. Christian Horner made a version of this same argument years ago after a Verstappen penalty in Austin. Gunther Steiner made it about smaller teams getting less benefit of the doubt. None of that is new, and none of it is specific to Hamilton. What is new is that the FIA appears to be treating it as a live issue this year. As part of a wider 2026 overhaul of the International Sporting Code, stewards are now expected to publish more detailed public explanations of their rulings. Not just the verdict, but the reasoning and the specific regulation applied. That's part of why we know, in writing, exactly why Leclerc walked and Hamilton didn't at the same corner. 3 driver stewards were also brought in for the season specifically to add a driver's perspective to panels that otherwise rotate. Following the Spa weekend, drivers were reportedly scheduled to sit down with the FIA specifically to discuss the Turn 5 discrepancy and stewarding consistency more broadly. The same meeting where the Silverstone false start standard was also reportedly on the table. The cost of Hamilton's stretch, in points, is not abstract. He went from 32 points behind championship leader Kimi Antonelli after the British Grand Prix to 50 points behind heading into the summer break. So where does that leave the actual question? Not whether the FIA is out to get a specific driver, nothing in the record supports that, and Hamilton didn't claim it. The real question, the one he raised, the one Stella and Russell and others have raised in different forms this year and in years past, and the one the FIA is apparently reviewing right now, is whether a technical threshold like front axle alignment or a 2mm grid movement should be the deciding factor when the outcomes on either side of that threshold look this different to everyone watching. That's not proven either way. It's an open question on the record that the sport's own governing body says it's currently working on. Whatever comes out of that review will show up in how the next borderline call gets made, and we'll know fairly quickly whether anything actually changed.